Hi there, and a very warm welcome to this week's video. So the backstory here is that I didn't know what to show you this week. I sort of had a blackout in my brain and I thought about what to show you, but I couldn't think of anything interesting. So this morning, right now before the video, I decided to just show you my 10 favorite nodes inside of Octane, and hopefully you're good with that. So what we are going to do is to show you those nodes inside of Cinema 4D, but also inside of Blender, since they sometimes are a little bit different in naming, but also in functionality. So let's hope that's what you like. So let's grab your coffee and let's keep going. Welcome to 3D and Nodeland. So we have the Cinema 4D setup here, and then we have the Blender setup here. Again, I'm using the knob because this is providing a lot of different surface detail that is really good for the nodes I'm going to display. So let's jump right in with the first node. As you know me, I like my Vertex maps, and I actually used them in the last two tutorials, so if you're interested where I use that, you can watch those. So on the number 10, it's my node to bring in those attributes into the shader, which is the attribute node. Here we go, let's create one. Then we have to match the attribute, so this time it's a float attribute, and also match the name, which is concave. So let's type this in. Here we go, and if we connect this, we have successfully brought in our shader to the material. In Blender, you can either use vertex weights or vertex groups or color attributes, and you can see them here if you go to the rollout here and then go to attribute, and this gives you the preview same as in Cinema 4D. The difference in Blender is that if we bring in an attribute, we have a color or a grayscale attribute to choose from, and we cannot switch them later on. So we need to decide what to bring in first. So this time we have a color attribute and we want to call it convex this time. Here we go, and then pipe it into the albedo. And here we go, we can see it's working exactly the same. The next one is best shown on a large plane. So let's bring an UV map and the chaos texture and connect it all up. And you can see this is made to hide repetition on larger planes, such as grass fields on landscapes. The one caveat here is that it doesn't work on projections, so if I change the projection to something else here, box for example, and change that, you can see nothing's happening. Also notice that transforms are not used in the texture, because if we do that, we get the repetition, but the blending stays the same. So we have to use that in the transform of the chaos texture in order to make it work. Here we go. This is pretty much exactly the same in Blender, so let's bring in a chaos here. And then also our UV map, connect it all up, and then you can see it's doing exactly the same. The only difference is that we don't have material tags on Blender's objects here, so we cannot give different UV maps from a material projection. In Cinema 4D this would be possible here, so if we go to our tag and then change the projection to, for example, cubic, you can see this has the more or less same effect than the transform, but we can do different stuff. For example, turn our UV map around or use different projections. We would have to change the UV map itself in Blender to have the same effect. To best show you the attributes of the next node, you might be wondering what's happening to the knob here. If you're following me on Twitter, you might have noticed that I picked up Plasticity, which is a CAD modeler, and I quickly modeled this knob here. By the way, let me know if you're interested in Plasticity tutorials as well, down in the comments below. So if you get CAD data without beveled corners, what you can do is go to Rounded Edges, enable that, go to Rounded Edges and create this node here, and then create a radius. So something like that, and you can see something is showing up and it looks more realistic right out of the box. What I would recommend is also go and set this to accurate to get more accurate representation. And if you have some sort of artifacts, what sometimes helps is increasing the samples. Here we go. In Blender, let's create the node, and then we need to flap open the geometric properties and plug it in here. The default mode in Blender is set to accurate already, and also we have to type in the numbers in meters, so 0.05 might result in something like that. And if you see something like that, then the radius is too large. So we have to get a couple more zeros in there to get the same behavior as in Cinema 4D. Of course, this is an optical illusion, so if we go too close, this doesn't hold up anymore, and therefore beveled edges are the best way to go if you want to get close to an object. The next one can be used for a lot of different things, so two examples here. One is being dust. So right now this is camera dependent, so we need to switch that from a camera dependent to a axis dependent mode. So what we need to do is also set the fall off direction to -y, and then no matter where we turn our knob, the dust is settling on top of it. U-dependent roughness is also a thing that I usually do with a Falloff Map. This can be prevalent in some materials and you have to view them in reality to see whether it's true or not. To do that, what we need to do is invert those knobs here so we get the black color on the rim. Then we need to bring that into the roughness. Now this makes our object really rough. So what we actually need to do is copy the roughness value that we had before into the minimum slot here. And now if I go close with the camera, you can see the steeper the angle, the more glossy, the less rough the object gets. In Blender, the node is exactly the same for the most part, but we have a difference with the fall off direction. So if we go to that, we can manually set it here. If you rather like to have a direct input, what you can do is go to Octane values and then go to the float value and pipe that into the direction. And if we set it to -1, then we have exactly the same as in Cinema 4D. Obviously it had to show up at some point, so this is the time for the dirt map to shine. Basically I use it for the same thing as I use my vertex maps here. So I create concave and convex edges. If you leave it at default values, you get the concave edges. So let's show you by getting the values a little bit higher. Here we go. And if you invert it, you get the convex edges. Let's get the values a little bit lower. If you're looking for some variation, there's also a trick. There's a dirt map built in. So what you can do is just get a texture here and pipe that into the dirt map and therefore get the chipped up look that you mostly are looking for. In Blender again, this is exactly the same, but with the difference that you have to type in your values in meters again. So the radius map here, let's go with a higher strength, is also like rather low. And then you can also invert it and therefore get the convex edges. A little bit hidden under custom texture, there's the gradient generator, and this is basically Octane's native gradient generation tool. It has a lot of options to do different gradients, as well as some other things as gamma, and also projection and transform plugins here, so you can do whatever you like with the gradient. This is exactly the same in Blender, so if we can get a gradient generator, pipe it into the albedo, you get your gradients with all the options. The only difference is that the UV map is not respected as default, so what you need to do is go to projection, then shift click it to get more options, and then go to UV map, and if we do that and then set it to spiral, we get exactly the same behavior as in Cinema 4D. Since I very often use instances of objects, the random color is invaluable to me because it randomizes the coloration of objects. Now let's do this by going to the knob, instance it, and then either set it to render or multi-instance, and then zoom out, and you can see each object gets a different random color. Well, color is a little bit exaggerated, the values range from black to white, so they are not colored. In Blender, this is exactly the same, so random color, here we go, and then plug it into the albedo. To instance, we can use different methods, for example, geometry nodes, but we are using a very simple technique here by cloning the object to another object. Let's do this by bringing in an icosphere and get it around 150 centimeters. Zoom out so we can see all of it. Go to the Object tab Then go to Instancing, go to Faces, and then what we need to do is bring in our object. So we just choose the knob and the knob top, and then Shift, drag that into the icosphere. And we can see now we have cloned those objects on top of the other objects, and they get our random colors. So basically those values can be used to give those objects different materials, different colors, or also vary the position of the material. I have an OSL script for that. The next one might be a little bit boring, but actually I had to put it in there because it's so versatile and I actually use it quite a lot. So I do prefer it over the Cinema 4D noise inside of Octane, as it has a lot of options also, not quite as many, but enough for my taste. Also paired with the right projection, which is the XYZ to UVW, it becomes a real 3D noise, and therefore you can just use it and don't have to fear any seams or broken up edges. In Blender, this noise has another name, so if you search for noise, you can see it is called a noise texture. It comes with the same options here, so when we plug it into the albedo and then go for the projection, the right projection comes in from the start, but the translation here is missing, so we have to append the 3D transform again. So here we go, and now if we get a smaller value in here, we get the same as in Cinema 4D. Quick small noise bonus here, so if you are a fan of the Cinema 4D noise, you can actually use that in Blender Octane. So this comes with the whole plethora of noises. Let's choose Wavy Turbulence, connect it to the albedo, connect the projection to it, and then also make another transform to make it even smaller. Here we go. Now this is 2D. To get it to work in 3D, you just tick use 4D noise, and there you are. The next one is a godsend, especially if you're a hard surface modeler like me. So let's bring in a material. So this is a texture that I always use, and bring it in here. So although this object is UV unwrapped, we can see we have seams on the UV unwrapped edges, but we can mitigate that by going to the object, projection, then go to the projection and set it to triplanar. This doesn't work for now, as we need a triplanar object in front of the texture, like so. So let's arrange that here a little bit better. Now the last thing we need to do is get the scale down. So let's add a UV transform here also, and then scale it down since the object is rather small. Something like that looks good. Last but not least, let's go to the blend angle and set it higher to 45 degrees. And this gives us a very uniform map across the whole object. Obviously, this can be used in a lot of channels, in the diffuse, maybe a little bit weakened, but also in the roughness to get some surface variation going. In Blender again, the workflow is exactly the same. So we bring in an image, shift click on the projection to get more options, go for triplanar projection here, search for the triplanar map, here we go, and then bring it in front of the texture. Now the difference here is that we have to connect to more than one socket from the texture output. In Cinema 4D this is automated to spread across all the axes, but here in Blender you have to feed all the axes individually. Maybe there's a trick you can get this working quicker, but here we go. So now we can go to 45 and also go to a 3D transform here and set the value to be smaller, 0.05 for example. Here we go. So I actually left in the triplanar mapping because this is good to show off our last node that I probably use the most often in all my materials. It's a simple one again, but it's very versatile. And of course you've seen it, I'm talking about the Octane gradient. So let's bring this into the stream and show the versatility here. So what I have here is basically a remapper in which I can remap from black to white, or also invert. So we can just reverse those points and therefore invert the map. Bring in different colors. So let's go down here and bring in a blue, for example. Stuff like this is just possible with this node. Let's delete out the middle knob here to show you something else. And this is the mode here. So it has a simple mode and a complex mode. And if we show all the extensions here, you can see every one of those knobs gets a value input. So if I create one more, you can see the value shows up here. There are two more values, start and end, and those are basically the start and the end of the gradient. So if I have my knobs aligned to the front and the end, basically those are the same. So what I could do here is, if we scroll up here to, for example, a RGB spectrum, I could use some different colors. So make it go from green. So I use start and value 1 at the same time, because those are lining up right now. And then when I duplicate this, I can get it to a more cyan color here, and then use the end and value 2 here. And therefore I get both of those colors inside of my gradient. Now, we are not limited to single colors. We can also use, for example, our UV map. So we can just use the and layer 2 here, or value 2, and then blacken our UV map. And therefore, where the cyan color would show up before, now our UV map is showing up. What's important to know is that the gradient node doesn't respect Cinema 4D's interpolation here. So Cinema 4D can interpolate per knot. Octane can only interpolate per the whole gradient. And you do that up here. So you can go from linear, for example, to cubic, and therefore change the interpolation of the whole gradient. I think I could do a whole tutorial on this, but this is it for now. Let's jump over to Blender. In Blender, this node is actually called Gradient Map. Here we go. Let's bring it up and plug it into the stream. And basically, it's the same as in Cinema 4D. You have this knobs here, and you can remap your values. And also you have those inputs. When you create another input, you get another value here. And also, in addition, you have the position knobs. Now, those should get you the position of those values here, of those sliders. So in theory, you could use values to position them around. This is not accessible in Cinema 4D. Now, this would be already it, but there's a small bonus in which I try to make this knob look good with all of the nodes that we talked about before. So if you care to join me in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to try to shade this thing. Alright, let's try to set this up in a rapid fire kind of way. So first of all, let's drop down a floor plane, make a material. So material, create Octane glossy material, assign it to the plane, make the material active, and bring in our trusted tiled metal texture here. Create a chaos texture. Here we go, and plug it all together. Go to the chaos texture, go to UV transform and make a transform. Set this to 0.2 and also activate the angle option in the chaos texture. Before we do anything, let's go to the texture here and set the BRDF model to GGX energy preserving and the bump to 0.01. Then scroll down to our Octane gradient, bring that in and duplicate that 3 more times. Here we go. Then make some space here and bring that in between the chaos and the material. Let's adjust the floor's color this way and go from a value of 40 to a value of 50. Let's do the same thing a couple of times more for other attributes. So go from the chaos to our roughness here, and we bring in the value of 70 to a value of 50. Here we go. And last but not least, for our bump, let's bring in the chaos texture and go to bump, and then bring in a value of 10. And the large value here is actually 0. Last but not least, let's bring in a gradient generator down here. So gradient generator, and pipe it through a gradient again. Here we go. And this goes into the opacity to feather off our texture in the background. To do this, we go from a linear to a radial texture, invert that, and then also go for a white color to get rid of the repetition. Last but not least, we want to bring in our endpoint here a little bit more to the side to avoid opacity underneath our knob. So let's go with a value of 75. And this is our floor done. Let's create our hero material from scratch by going to Materials, Create, and then Universal Material. Make sure it's assigned to the object as well as active in the node tree here. Let's select the material, go to Basic and set the BSDF to Energy Preserving, and also go to the bump and set it to 0.005. Bring in our trusted metal tiled surface texture, make a projection and set it to the triplanar mapping. Here we go. Also, of course, let's set the triplanar in front of that and then connect it and set the triplanar blend to 45. Let's also create a UV transform and set the UV transform to 0.025. Here we go. Let's bring in our vertex attributes by going to Attributes, assign them here. So let's go to Float, Concave, and then copy that and Convex. Also get rid of this preview here. Here we go. What I want to do next is bring in the Octane gradient texture. Here we go. And then get it to complex and build us ourselves a tool with 2 float textures assigned to it. So we are going to duplicate 2 floats and assign one to the start and value 1 and one to the end and value 2. Actually, I want to build some sort of curvature map. So let's start by mixing the triplanar with the concave by scrolling down here, getting a mix. Actually, we want to have this in texture 1 and this in texture 2. So we have something like this. Next, what I want to do is duplicate this and bring that through here as we want to map those. So the way we want to map this is 0.5 in the upper and 0 in the lower. So we get our dark edges. Let's actually do the same for the convex map, but we don't need the triplanar, we need a noise. So let's go with an Octane noise here. Also, we have to have very specific values. The octave should be 7, this one should be 0.625, and the gamma 1.25, and the contrast 3. Then go with a trusted XYZ to UVW projection and set it to 0.025 on all axes actually. And last but not least, let's mix this together with the convex map here. Here we go. Let's see what we are doing by plugging it into the albedo. And then we are using this gradient here to get our final map out here. So in this case, we are going from 0 to 0.5. Actually, what we want to do here in the gradient, get this knob here to a position of 40. So we get our edges. To finish our curvature map, we just need to add both of those together. Here we go. And disable the preview here as well. And then go to the albedo. And now we have all the information in one map. The next step here is pretty analog to what we did with our floor. So let's bring an Octane gradient to remap some values. Basically, what I need to do is get those knobs some colors and more knobs in here to get those different gradients going. So first of all, let's go with 20, 50, 20 to get some rust color here down in the shadows. Then at the 35% mark, let's get a 220, 10, 30. So this is our object color. And we keep that color, so control and click here to around the value of 58. So then we have our edges here. And those edges will then be almost the same color, but 35 in the value, so a little bit lighter. Last but not least, we bring in this value to around 70 and give it a value of 40. So now we have set the diffuse of our object. Let's actually set this knob here to 60 straight and then copy this whole thing. And then what I want to do is delete those both and also this here. Then make this pure black and this pure white, because this is going to be our Metalness. So next up, metallic here. And this then should give us our nice metallic chipped away edges. Next, let's take care of roughness. So let's duplicate the upper one here again. So this time what I want to delete is actually those two. And let's actually plug that in before we do anything to it. I obviously know the values from before. So this one should be white. Then this one here should be 80. And then this one, last one here, should be around 50. Let's actually go and bring this over here by control clicking and make another one here around the value of 50. And that for now takes care of our roughness. So let's do our bump map next. As a last part before a little bit of fine tuning, let's actually get our bump going by again copying the topmost part here. Let's feed in our add straight into the bump. And then what we want to do is delete this thing here and then go with colorless values. So 15 and 5, same as the next one, colorless 5. And then as the metal is the lowest part in our material, a 0. Here we go. What we can do to fine tune this a little bit is go to the upper gradient here and move this white spot to the left a little bit. So I already know this has to be a value of 75. And this brings in a little bit more rust. Also what we can do is go further down and go to the mix and adjust this also. So this one here I adjusted to 0.45. So we get this bumpy, rusty behavior here. But this is pretty much it. The only thing that I think of to do now is maybe turn on aces here and then move around the camera and marvel at our nicely shaded knob. Again, this takes longer as expected, as always almost. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and also the bonus. If you want to have the scene, this is available on my Patreon, of course. Also, if you're interested in similar content, you can watch the Power of Procedural Materials off of my YouTube channel. And now, without further ado, let's thank those who made it possible to make such videos, which are my Patreons. Especially my €50 tier subscribers, Shields Augustinen and Leon Studio TV. I can only repeat myself and really thank you for your massive support. Also, my €15 tier subscribers, Render King Alessandro Bonchio, Alessio De Vecchi, Bavana, BVR, Chris Fritchie, Christian Grajewski, Computer Generated, Erbe Plus Academy, George Luna, Harish Pavaskar, Choi Chikolin, Just a Frickin', Chris Clemson, Ludger, Nico Straub, Part 1 of 2, Guok Andang, Raiko, Renato Marquez, Reshock, Shamus Johnson, Shiro 2049, Terry Wayne Ranson, Yasin Rupp, and Shibor Shang. Again, thank you all so very much. I really appreciate it. I also appreciate those people who are still with me and still listening. Thank you very much for your community and welcome to the VIP corner. As communication seems a little bit hampered on the Patreon server, I thought about making a Discord. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about that. And if you want to show your support, let's post a number 10 keycap with it. And this is all I have to say here. Have a nice start into the week, a good time, and happy proceduralizing. Bye!